Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for having me on. It's awesome. I'm really looking forward to going through some of this stuff and sharing a little bit of the perspective. So,
Yeah, definitely. And so, by all means, the floor is yours. Again, really excited to hear your thoughts.
all right, awesome. Well, I have some PowerPoint slides, and I really want to go through some of that stuff. And I've heard a lot of fear among some of the folks here in Washington State and also throughout the country. And, I always try to ground things back in Scripture that, we are supposed to be the sons of Issachar that know the signs of the times, and we know what to do about it. We're armed with that knowledge of what we should be doing. And that's really what I think the conference is about today. What should we be doing about this? And we shouldn't just be praying. We should also be moving to action. And if we wish to remain free, as Patrick Henry said, we must fight. So I want to tell a little bit of a story. And it was a couple of years ago. I was in Ethiopia, and we went into a town called Nekemte. And 3 days before we got there, there was a big gun battle between two warring Christian tribes. And that doesn't really make any sense to us, but it actually happens quite often around the world that there's, warring Christian tribes. And so 3 days before we got there, there was a gun battle. The Ethiopian army came in. They put this down and secured our advance team to roll in. In fact, some of the young kids who were on our advance team with part of our ministry were rolling into Nekemte over machine gun brass. And you should have seen the look on their faces, right? Because they weren't used to this kind of thing. And so what was happening was the second day, the richest guy in the town, he came up and he invited us, and he owned the hotel that we were staying in, hotel in quotation marks. If you've ever been on the mission field, you know what I mean. The toilet was broken and there was orange stuff growing in the shower, but we just thank God there were no mosquitoes and it was a bed. So he owned this hotel. He invited us over to his house, and as we got done with dinner, he says to us, the day you guys leave, they secured this truce for 3 days, but the day you guys leave, this war starts again. And really fatalistic, and he's Christian himself, very fatalistic. There was just really nothing that could be done. So the next day, tens of thousands of people showed up. We have a drone shot of it. Just an amazing amount of people showed up from both warring Christian tribes. And my pastor, Pastor Andre Shapoval, said from the stage, he said, whatever the devil had for this area is broken in Jesus' name. And the whole crowd could just kind of feel this was a turning point. And the next day as we left, Andre said there's going to be peace. And as we're rolling out of this city in Ethiopia, the local contact, our really great friend Sammy Abar, gets a phone call, and he has a shocked look on his face, and we were like, what's going on, Sammy? Tell us what's going on. And he said they just declared peace for the first time in 10 years. Now, if God can do that in Ethiopia, I know he can do that, and he wants to do that in America. We just have to be ready to receive the move of his Spirit. And as conservatives and Christians, we have to be bold and courageous in our faith, and we have to be bold and courageous in preaching not just the gospel of salvation, but the gospel of the kingdom. So I want to talk a little bit about America's Christian history. We have to know ourselves. And there are a lot of people out there that try to still argue America was not founded on Judeo-Christian principles. It's a flat-out lie. I'm going to disprove that here in 3 minutes. I hope you guys are ready. I'm going to go really fast. Here we go. The first two founding documents, talking about the Virginia Charter and the Mayflower Compact, both said as the purpose of government was to expand Christianity and preach the gospel. But it got even more interesting in 1643 with the Articles of Confederation of the United Colonies, where it was the first document that united the colonies together in one form and one form of belief. And here's what it said. Whereas we all came into these parts of America with one and the same end and aim, namely to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel in purity with peace. That was the first major unifying document, and that was the very first sentence. So there's really no question. But some people still continue to argue that. And so I'll move to 1765 to 1769, when Sir William Blackstone was writing his commentaries on the laws of England. This was the laws of England for 150 years. And in that document, he specifically defined two things: the law of nature and the law of nature's God. He defined the law of nature as those truths that God wrote into creation, and the law of nature's God as Holy Scripture. So when Thomas Jefferson, only a few years later, wrote in the Declaration of Independence the law of nature and the law of nature's God, he was actually using two legal terms of art to say that this country was being founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Well, then a guy named Karl Marx started writing in the 1840s, and people started questioning it again. So the United States Congress actually took this up as an issue. Are we a Christian nation? Were we founded on Judeo-Christian principles? And in 1853, Senator George Badger, after a lengthy process of investigation, came out with the conclusion for the United States Senate and said, quote, "We are a Christian people," end quote. The following year, Representative James Meacham also came out with the House conclusions on this issue and said something very interesting. Had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. That's an amazing statement. Well, a few years later, a guy named Charles Darwin started writing. People started questioning again, is America really a Christian nation? Were we founded on Judeo-Christian principles? And the United States Supreme Court, no less, took this up in the Holy Trinity case in 1892. And in that case, they ruled as a matter of fact in law, quote, "This is a Christian nation," end quote. So you have all the founding documents. You've got the Declaration of Independence. You've got the United States Congress, the United States Senate, and you got the United States Supreme Court. And we're still arguing this point? We shouldn't be. Let's be bold. This nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We need to reclaim that as a conservative movement. All right, I want to move to who is behind all this stuff. A lot of people ask me that, but it's very interesting that a guy named Rich Higgins, who was the strategic planner for the National Security Council, actually wrote a memorandum to President Donald Trump explaining exactly who was behind this. And here's what he said in this memo. He called them the counter states. We know them as the deep state today, but he called them the counter states. And he said that their purpose was to destroy the vision of America that led to his election, and also to demoralize and disenfranchise those people that voted for Donald Trump. And you can read this memo online, and I sincerely hope that you do. But he called out three specific things: globalists, Marxists, and Islamists in America that are working together to really bring this country down. And I think we all kind of know this intuitively, but to have a strategic planner for the National Security Council brief the president on that, that's pretty significant. And as I understand it, President Trump read this, and Rich Higgins was then fired by H.R. McMaster's because of this memo. And I think the reason was this second slide that I have up here, where he specifically said that not only is the Democrat Party the counter-state enabler that sustains and executes this Marxist propaganda and Marxist agenda, but he also said that Republicans, established Republicans, specifically became the hard left's designated defeat mechanism. And as the conservative movement in the United States of America, we cannot become the hard left's designated defeat mechanism. We need to stand up on principle. Rich Higgins also in this memorandum clearly stated the model that these guys were using. It's the Maoist insurgency model as Thomas A. Marx laid out. And in that there were 5 things, and you can kind of see this today. The first is the mass line. In other words, they have one narrative that goes out through all of these news channels. So you, for example, can be on the East Coast of the United States like I was and see on CNN this term Easter worshipers that nobody had ever heard before. And then it moved. I flew literally to the West Coast, and the same word is being used on different news channels and different news programs locally. Where did that come from? It came from the use of the mass line. Second thing is the United Front, where Islamists and Marxists particularly, we know them as the Squad, will stand on stage and act united, even though you would think that maybe some of their belief systems are not united. So this United Front that is on the left, we need to have a United Front here on our side of Christian constitutional conservatism. We need to stand up instead of griping about the things we may disagree on, that may be a little doctrinal dispute, maybe among denominations, or a slight dispute on something as far as conservatives are concerned. Let's be united and fight back against those folks that really want to destroy our republic. And yes, we live in a republic, not a democracy. All right. The third thing that was interesting is they use something called the violent section or the special section. We see Antifa, the Socialist Rifle Association, Redneck Revolt, the John Brown Gun Club. And you can actually see these organizations that are out there now and look them up. But it's part of this Maoist insurgency model. The next is political warfare. And you've been talking about that quite a bit today, Jeff. We've had a lot of speakers talking about this, where you have this smear of anybody that brings anything up that may counter this narrative being put out by the mainstream media. We call it label lynching or character assassination of people. We're seeing it across the country. So if you see somebody being character assassinated, don't add to it. Stand up with them, because what these folks want these people to do is resign. Don't resign. If you're a conservative being character assassinated, don't resign. Stand up to this bullying that's happening. Stand your ground and make them back down. They're expecting us to cave in, and we have to stand strong on the line. Also, you'll notice, too, I put in there international action. There are organizations that are working against the United States. One of them is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The second is the Socialist International. The current head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, was actually a president of the Socialist International. And so you have guys like Tedros that President Trump has been talking about recently. He was actually an Ethiopian communist, but also associated with the Socialist International. So these things aren't happening in a vacuum. These people have longstanding relationships that they're developed that they're coming against America. So let's move next very quickly to the red-green axis. Trevor Loudon really speaks about this quite a bit, but I want to show you a couple quotes. Carlos the Jackal, only a coalition of Islamists and Marxists can destroy the United States. Also, General Mihai Pacipa in Romania said very clearly that the Soviets had infiltrated Islamic organizations, and that's why you see these close ties now today. All right, I think a lot of people know that in Chapter 2 of the Communist Manifesto, they lay out everything that we're against: abolition of private property, abolition of religion and morality, abolition of countries and nationality, and abolition of the family. So we know where this is coming from at its root. Also, I want to highlight something else. We see this quite a bit. Vox Day put this up, so I like to always quote this. Social justice warriors today always lie, they always double down on their lie, and they always project on us how they are themselves. So, for example, if somebody is accusing somebody of Russian collusion, we might want to take a look at them first. So when you see this happening to you if you're running, or you see this happening to a candidate in your area, you might want to then begin to investigate the person that's projecting onto you. And then also, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the Muslim Brotherhood and their in the Holy Land Foundation trial. This was introduced into evidence. They said very clearly what their goal is, and that literally is to destroy America in a kind of grand jihad and eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within by sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers. When I talk about this, this has already been introduced into evidence in a court trial, so this is not being argued. We just need to realize there is an intentional plan trying to destroy America, and we need to be intentional in our solutions. And that brings me to the solutions portion. First, we need to map our areas ideologically. This is an example map of Washington State, and I'm sure some people are laughing, and some people in Cowlitz County are saying, hey, we're on the west side, but we're conservative. But map your area ideologically. Get to know it, understand what's going on. Number two, map your local area organizations and find out who's actually behind this stuff. Who's behind attacking conservatives? Who's behind attacking your local churches like the Church at Planned Parenthood and my good friend Ken Peters? These organizations exist. They're funded a lot by George Soros, but it's bigger than George Soros. And we need to, again, understand that they're all interconnected, and the same people that are in one organization are usually operating in another organization. The next is screen capture some of the stuff they're putting up. This is one of the most offensive things that I found Antifa Idaho put up. She might be brown, but she supports Trump and white nationalists. If you know a Nazi, grab a brick and resist. And there's a Hispanic lady with a black eye. These types of things are out there. And by the way, this was up on Twitter for over a year and a half. So you know how we're being censored, and many of you have heard stories about censorship of the conservative movement. Look at what they're doing. Bring this to the public attention and start to counter this narrative that's out there that only conservatives, are hateful people or something like that. Actually, we love the law. We love the Lord's law. We love the Constitution. And we need to shine the light on the truth of what's happening in these organizations on the other side. The other thing is get them on video camera. I'll show you a picture right now on the Capitol steps. This was actually the steps of the Supreme Court of Washington State. You see they unfurled the communist flag and then posted this on Antifa Action. These are the kind of things that you can show your friends and neighbors and say, hey, look, this is not American. We need to counter this everywhere we can. Number three, investigate property records. You'll see in the Holy Land Foundation trial, one of the unindicted co-conspirators that was listed there was the North American Islamic Trust. And then you'll see in Spokane, valley, that's who owns the mosque. And so we need to know these connections to organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood that I hope someday Trump will declare a terrorist organization. Compromise. We need to stop compromising in the conservative movement. Now, a lot of people say, well, that means you can't work with anybody. No. Leadership is not about the ability to compromise. It's about the ability not to. It's about the ability to persuade people and bring them over to your point of view. We can compromise on process, but not on principle. And too often there's been compromises on principle. Let's talk about some specific solutions, and then I'll end here very quickly. First of all, if you don't know about the New American Magazine, it is the premier intelligence digest on Marxism in America. They've been right 10 years ahead of time. I think it's most important, Jeff, that we have the best information possible. These guys are so right, they have never had to retract a single article. I think that's amazing over 2 decades, 3 decades of journalism. In addition to that, I've used their magazines quite literally sitting on the dais in Olympia to ask questions of expert witnesses and watch them turn red or purple because they didn't know how to answer my questions because of the information in the New American Magazine. Also, Understanding the Threat, premier intelligence digest in America on the Islamists. My great friend John Guandolo is running that organization. They do trainings all the time, and they're doing trainings online right now. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go there. Also, create a movement, create a local machine, and become the media. Let's get into some specifics. I'm going to go a little quickly, but if you want to create a movement in your area, you really need 5 things. You need a legislator, an agitator, a poster child, a strategist, and a wise sage. And here's kind of the definitions behind them. You really need that champion locally. It could be a county commissioner, could be a state rep, but you need that champion to carry the cause, able to articulate those reasons behind it. You need the agitator, somebody that keeps the issue in the foreground on social media. And look, you all know who I'm talking about right now. You have a picture of somebody in your mind right now. And don't discount the agitator because sometimes maybe they're a little edgy. We want to be peaceful. We want to be articulate, but we also want to be persistent. And that's where the agitator can come in. You also want the poster child, somebody that's actually had their business taken away because of the draconian policies that we're facing today. You want them in the foreground on these things. You want your strategist, that's your person that is very adept at playing chess locally. You want that person in the foreground too. You want your wise sage, that's your person that's been crowned with the white hair of wisdom. And, you know, we have great folks locally like Pastor Ken Peters, Jim Robinson, some other folks, great wise sages. They can say, okay, here's what I remember from 30 years ago. Here's what you need to do today to move the conservative message forward. Also talking about a movement, you need structure. You need a vision, you need a mission, you need objectives, you need strategies, and you need tactics. A lot of people confuse strategies and tactics. In fact, arguments over tactics actually end up splitting movements a lot of time. Don't argue over tactics. If somebody has something that's peaceful, that is effective, and that's where their passion is, let them do that. Don't say, oh, you have to do it this way. Also strategies too. Everybody has ideas and principles. Get together and don't argue. You know, if one idea is countering another one a little bit, pick one and go with it. And don't be hurt and have your feelings hurt because somebody chose a different strategy than yours. That's been so detrimental to the conservative movement in the United States. And right now we need unity. So unify around a strategy that is effective. Maybe it's 95% effective where you think yours is 100%. Go with the 95, unify with folks. All right, I want to talk too about some lessons learned. Use images. It's powerful. Images today of closed businesses, very powerful. Images today of people that have been banned from fishing and hunting here in Washington State, for example, very powerful. Be moral, be competent, and be professional. A lot of times we got Christians out there that are not competent, but they got all the heart in the world. Great. Then that means you need training. So get trained, be professional. You got other folks who maybe they're totally competent, but they're not moral. Get trained in the word. You know, that's where Pastor Ken Peters and a lot of these other pastors like Greg Locke come in. Get moral too with those folks that are competent but maybe not have a good walk with Christ. Emotions very often trump facts. And so in today's world, use stories. Like the story I told at the beginning in regards to Ethiopia, use stories to illustrate points and drive that home. Corruption. It is a process that is as straight as the two lines in the road. It happens. Recognize it's out there. Train your folks for when those corrupting influences come in. Stay in the Word. Stay in prayer. Stay in regular communion with your family. And we have all that time at home right now. Do that so that corruption can't get in even parts of your family as well. Also, don't be fooled. This is a full contact sport. Being involved in politics, Jeff, I know you know that, but there's joy in the journey. We can affect a lot of lives and preach the gospel and expand his kingdom in this time specifically. All right. I'll move down a couple to become the media. Question the mainstream media and make them defend their godless socialist views. We do a lot of man on the street stuff where reporters will try to ambush us. We start asking them questions live on Facebook and make them defend their positions. You know, we can't be afraid to do that. We have the truth and the moral high ground here. We need to challenge them on some of the lies that have been perpetrated out there in the mainstream media and really stand up on principle on these things. And don't be afraid to do that. It's amazing what happens when a reporter has to start answering questions. They really don't know what to say a lot of times. Also, start a local radio show and a podcast. Here in Washington State, I have Patriot Radio. I've been doing it for 10 years. Broadcast live twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then sent to podcast on iTunes and Podbean. Do that kind of a thing where you have a radio show and a podcast that is addressing your local issues. And do regular videos too, especially thanking folks locally. Just those 3-minute videos make a huge, huge difference. And use encrypted technology where you have the opportunity. And also, if you get a chance, start a news site locally so you can get the news out in your local area. What to read, these last two slides, take a picture of these last two slides. Okay, if we're going to hold elected officials accountable, we actually need to read the Bible and know what it says, and our local religious leaders. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. How many of you have read the state Constitution cover to cover? How many of you have read the Bible cover to cover? Even Christians. We have to know what we believe, and the only way to do that is to actually read those documents. A couple other books down there. The Law by Frederick Bastiat, very good on property rights. And then this memorandum to the President of the United States in 2017 by Rich Higgins. Strongly urge you to read that. And also The Fate of Empires by Sir John Bagot-Glove. It's free online. It's like 26 pages. You can read it in a night, and it gives you a very clear idea of where we are in this day and age. Last but not least, some research resources. If you want to go find out more about what I talked about and do your own research, here is a great list of places to go. And I can send you more, but this is in addition to the New American Magazine and Understanding the Threat. Jeff, I want to thank you for having me on today. I know that was a lot in a very short amount of time, but I hope it gives a lot of people around the country kind of the framework from which we can start building a movement to restore our God-honoring constitutional republic.